Data Storytellers, another professional introduction episode on the Data Storytellers podcast with one of our board of advisors members, Lance Glosemeyer. Lance is leading data, BI, and analytics over at Dairy Queen, and we've been having some great conversations since last year. He's been engaging with our community. He's, again, one of our members, and we're going to meet in person later this year in Nashville. He's going to join our annual event, and because of the topics that we've already covered with him over these months, we thought that it will be very valuable for the community to just kind of reflect on his journey as a data leader and to kind of understand some of those factors of success that really led him to where he is now, and what is he excited about today. Well, Lance, first of all, sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Looking forward to chatting about my experience and just the whole journey with Data Storytellers. It's great to be part of it.
Absolutely, and I know that with our members, my wife shows different levels of interest towards the different companies that we work with, right? But mysteriously, she's always asking about our Dairy Queen members, whether we're taking good care of you guys. So I'm being held accountable. Probably there's an emotional connection there with Dairy Queen.
Yeah, it is the fun of working for a brand that is really well known and has, we call them fans, that are really passionate. Love the product. Most people have that story about their DQ growing up and the one that they went to and the experiences that they've had. So it's always fun to hear those stories. And now it's fun to be part of it. And how do we use data to change, to enhance that experience and continue to bring good memories to people?
Fascinating. I can't wait to unpack it. And it's interesting that I do remember my first Dairy Queen experience because I grew up in Europe. Before coming to Canada, I lived 7 years in the UK, and there aren't too many Dairy Queens in that neck of the woods. And then when I actually came to Toronto, or now I'm in Vancouver, but when I arrived in Canada, I still remember my first Dairy Queen, Toronto downtown. I was like, yeah, this is pretty good. This is pretty good. In general, I don't have a sweet tooth, but good ice cream does get me.
Yeah, we have none in Europe, but same way, so I grew up most of my life in the Midwest and in the Twin Cities, which is obviously home to International Dairy Queen headquarters. So I'm in the backyard of it, and since I was a kid, there was a store nearby where after every game you'd go and you'd sit outside. They had a wall that you'd try to get everybody to honk as they drive by. So it is fun tying the memories since it's a brand that's been around for so long.
That's very interesting. You see, I did not get to participate in that. I just understood. I saw the short video on, I don't even know where I saw it, but those infographics that go over time and show. So I did not know that the OG fast food chain in the US is Dairy Queen. Yeah, everyone in Europe thinks it's McDonald's, right? But no, it's, and it go way back. So I think, I don't know. I don't want to, everyone can check the data for themselves, but I remember the snapshot of in the 1960s, Dairy Queen had more than 10 times the restaurants that McDonald's and Burger King and KFC might not have even existed at the time or had combined. Right, so it was that big of a cultural phenomenon.
Yep, yeah, we were one of the originals. It is a brand that has an incredible legacy.
Okay, there you go. It's funny, and not to bring too many of like personal memories into it, but I mean, you mentioned the Dairy Queen truck going and was it like ringing a bell or playing some song? We had the same in Hungary. It was called Family Frost. I don't even know if they exist anymore, but every single person knows the melody of the Family Frost truck. It's like a childhood memory. So that's really cool. And how did you, with Dairy Queen as a company, how long have you been there? What does your role cover now? Maybe we can just even reflect on your journey to how did you end up in this position?
Yeah, all great questions. I've been at Dairy Queen for about 9 years, a couple months short of that. Prior to Dairy Queen, I worked for a retail company in the Twin Cities. And I actually started out in the finance side of the world as an analyst, And then as I got further and further into my career, uh, I had this passion for the data part of it. So, good analysis requires good data, and good data is really hard to come by. But then the tools that allow you to do both the retrieval and the development of your data sets, as well as the analytics. So I did that for a while, and then about 9 years ago, there was an opportunity at Dairy Queen to come in, and actually the title itself was financial planning analysis, but it was much more BI. So it was much more about the analytics. And then as I got into it, there was this evolution of how do we modernize and start using data better. Obviously, we're talking an old brand with a great legacy of really good products, but in a market that is incredibly competitive and always changing. And there has been this major wave that is around data, and so that was our task 8-9 years ago, was let's modernize, let's get smarter with how we use our data. And it's been a journey of building from there. At the time, all of our analytical data lived with third parties. We couldn't automate anything, and that's where the journey started, is just how do we make standard reporting easy and seamless, and then how do we start doing better analytics, and that required building out a BI team so that we can enable everything along the way. It has been a journey. It's with plenty of bumps in the road, but we have learned a lot, and I think we're in a much better place today. But we have a lot of opportunity to grow as we continue to move forward.
And I'm sure we'll reflect on some of those war stories
Yeah.
as well. Now, what would be super interesting to me is because given that Dairy Queen is an organization that, I mean, how old is Dairy Queen? Do you know when it was founded?
Yeah, so we're over 85 years old now.
85 years old. Okay, so
Yeah,
it's a
and
beautiful age
yeah, so
for a company. Yeah.
we have been around for a long time, and obviously when we started, a much different environment. Contracts written, I'm half exaggerating, written on napkins, things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, the classic
And
napkin
obviously,
company.
being a franchisor now, it looks a whole lot different than it did back then. But even that, as a brand, we've learned a lot of things on the way on how you franchise, and we have some wonderful franchisees that we get to partner with. Who, you think of us from a franchisor perspective, we try to design products and develop menus and all of those kind of things. How do we market to our fans? But at the end of the day, it's franchisees that bring it to life
Mhm.
and deliver that final experience. So it is, we have a lot of franchisees that touch the brand in many different ways across 20 plus countries. So it's fun to see what that evolution has been, and it'll be fun to watch it as we go forward.
And that's fascinating because a franchise model, it's its own framework, its own dynamic, and it's also fascinating for me, like working with all these companies, all these in the past 10 years. Just how we work with most of the FT 500, and these are very
Yeah.
different companies, from Mastercard to Disney to Sony, like all these big brands. And with the franchise model, so what I'm saying is that in a lot of ways, the Dairy Queen brand is there to support the frontline
Yeah.
fighters, right? So you're enabling those restaurants to thrive, to serve customers better, to give amazing experiences. And this very much connects to what you do as a data analytics leader with the organization. You're trying to be an enabler, a support, and a helper. Now, something before we dive into the nuts and bolts is that when we talk about data storytelling, our members know, and people who participate in the masterclasses know, that we don't really talk strictly about how to explain data sets. That's like top of the iceberg. But how can you drive the right narrative around data and analytics in the business that will resonate with the stakeholders, that will help people to buy into it, to be excited about analytics, to love data analytics in the company? And the pathway is storytelling, and not even on a tactical way with the right anecdote at the right time, but really understanding what your company's history is. What is the company's identity? And then in the context of that, in the company's evolution itself, what role should data analytics play? Why is the organization investing into this? Should invest into this? In what ways to really create that engagement and that commitment? I know that you've been there for 9 years, but what were the main business pressures for Dairy Queen? And when I say pressure, I don't mean in a negative way. What were those factors that really helped Dairy Queen to embark on that journey? Because a lot of old organizations, look, don't fix what's not broken. We have an organizational culture and a way of working that proves to be incredibly successful. Why did they embark on this data-driven journey in the early days that now led to where you guys are now? And then we can kind of unpack how that unfolded.
Yeah, another great question. Yeah, I think for us, it goes back to we are in an industry that is incredibly competitive, and it's always evolving. There's always new restaurant brands coming in. You see some legacy brands leaving. And for us, where analytics comes into that is how do we continue to deliver products? And I will say a big part of it is that final experience that our franchisees deliver, but using data to enhance all of those things. How do we use data to reach our end fans, our consumers on where they're at, but also provide details on what products work best and how do they work in the industry, as well as how can we provide our franchisees with tools that make their jobs easier at the store level. I mean, running a restaurant has never been more complicated than it is today, with all of the new technologies that are constantly being added in, and that consistent evolution. And so that's the fun part of my job, is how do we use data and tell that story and try to enable, whether it's reaching our fans or supporting our franchisees, or on the corporate side, how do we make it easier? To me, that's the goal of BI is to make things easier that ultimately drive your sales and profitability, but drive operational efficiencies so that you're making every experience with the brand as good as it can be.
So maybe we can take a quick look at how things were when you joined, because that was 9 years ago. That's a wonderful breadth of time to look at. In data analytics, that's a whole epic of 9 years, and especially during those years. So we're talking about between a quick math. It's 2015, right? No, it's like 2016, rather. Wow, time flies. Yeah. 2016. So that was when data analytics was really, really gaining speed. I remember that we set up Data Leaders, the previous company that we sold in 2020. We set it up in 2017, but then we made the decision in 2015 that we'll do that, right?
Yeah.
There was a larger organization called Executive Leaders, and then we founded the brand Data Leaders. And that was that explosive time when the talk of the town was that data is the new oil. Now, obviously, we're in a different hype cycle, but how were things different when you joined Dairy Queen compared to how they are now? And we can maybe walk from there.
Yeah, it is amazing. When you get the chance to look back at how much it's always fun to take that step back. So I think back to when I joined, which was actually later in 2015. And I mentioned it before. So, we had no automated reporting. So think of just the foundation of BI. All of our analytical data, and we spend a lot of time looking at data out of point of sale systems and things like that. That all resided with third parties. And so if we wanted to look at any data, we would go to a third party site. We would use a query building tool. We download an Excel or a CSV, and then we would manipulate it in Excel to do our analytics. We couldn't automate anything along the way. And even, so you think about what you want your analysts doing, and you want analysts probably spending 80 or 90% doing an analysis. Well, we were flipped, where you were spending 80, 90% of the time just getting at data because you had to go through so many steps to do it. And then, along the way over that 9 years, we progressively got better. But there was a lot of selling on, there's costs with getting good at data. I think you think of any organization that is really good at data and analytics, and they have probably spent a significant amount of capital to get there.
Mm.
And so there is that whole sales pitch, which I know we'll talk a little bit or talk more about as we go, but it has been that, okay, we truly are at ground zero where we can't do anything on our own, and then each step that you take and how you add team members and how you sell it into the organization, it has been this gradual process to where we're at today, where we have all of those automated pipelines. All of our reporting is automated. Our analysts have learned to use different tools, right? So as these BI tools have become available and in many ways made things easier, but it also means people had to learn how to do their jobs differently. It's been fun to see the evolution of tools and data. It's also been fun to see the evolution of team members and how people have morphed and changed their skill sets and how their roles have changed. And I feel like we're in a much better place than we were, but we still have a long way to go. I said it several times that it's a competitive space to be in, and there are competitors that are doing really cool stuff with data and with technology. And then there's this whole wave of AI that's coming in, and how does it fit in to restaurants that we're going to continue to grow and evolve to deliver for our franchisees and for our fans.
And that's really cool that you get to be there and work and help a brand that you love with this special new modern capability. And if you do your job well, if you actually excel here, you can really impact the trajectory of this historical business in an amazingly significant way. And these are like real things, right? That we're talking about. This is not when, in a lot of those presentations and on stage, a lot of the conversation data analytics world tend to kind of take place in this like superficial layer. But no, at the end of the day, that's what it's about. And, even on the session, and that's what we always do. What we always do in the community is constantly making sure that you have the right foundations, you have the right narrative behind your data transformation, kind of understand in general where you're going, what is that story that you need to capture and drive with analytics, and then do you understand your best opportunities? Do you have some goals in front of you? Do you understand the risks here and the key blockers in that? And then ultimately, can you perform in this? So LEAP, launch, envision, anticipate, and perform, right? That's the LEAP framework that we have.
Yep.
Now, what's super fun to do, because you can do this today, and then of course there's a process. There's a very meticulous process behind how can you get the best outcomes and produce an action plan that will actually translate well in reality, which is exactly what we do on the masterclasses. But looking back is just as much fun through this same lens, because if you think back when you joined in 2015, the end of 2015, and you settle into a new organization, obviously there's that period when you understand the landscape and map out everything. What did you perceive to be your key opportunities when you joined, of how you guys should evolve that data analytics function, and what were the key blockers holding you back? And maybe we can also take it step by step.
Yeah. So I think the biggest observation is what I touched on earlier, was how hard it was. And at the time I came in, had a group of really talented people, but they were all on the analysis side. We didn't really have any true data people at that time to build the data architecture and do the engineering that we needed to. And so that to me was the biggest gap. And then this whole idea of storytelling, of less about any specific analysis, but how do you tell the importance of what I touched on earlier, of investing in your data practices and in your BI practices. And that, so, when I started, that was the landscape of how do we modernize, knowing that those were the biggest gaps. And it was a lot of building support and building champions that would be behind the business. In the early days, I took a couple different passes at it, meeting with leaders, and ultimately it led me to I put together a 12-page business case. You think of the who, what, where, why, when, not exactly in that order, starting with the why, and what benefits it could provide to our organization, and then starting to lay out what timelines would look like. But focusing on those benefits and how it could drive, there's an investment with it, but how it would drive value in the long run. And then putting the timeline. None of it happens immediately. I will say, this is my experience. Everybody probably feels a little different, but it always takes a bit longer than what you think it's going to. Whether that's getting people, whether that's getting the right tools that you need to do it. I mean, we POC'd a lot of different tools along the way to land to the stack that we're using today. But it's each step of that way, of that journey, continuing to build support and continuing to take partners and let them know what you're trying to do. Like I said, I had a really good group of analysts, and many of them are still here, but it was those data components that we didn't really have, that we had to build out.
And so I just came across this saying that resonated with me a lot, and maybe I needed to reach this ripe age of 33 to begin to appreciate it. That people often and mostly overestimate what they can do in a year, but underestimate what they can do in a decade.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. If I look at the original timeline that I had laid out on when we would, what you just said, the things I said we would do in a year, we were nowhere close to doing in a year. But now that we're about a decade in, we have probably checked most of those boxes. It's a great saying, because it is very truthful.
And even in Austin, there was this big aha moment for one of our community participants and someone who attended in Austin, George. Shout out to George if you listen from World Clinical Trials. And what really made everything click for him is at the very end, we brought up that example of succeeding in analytics is like winning the Tour de France, which is, well, what are the margins of a Tour de France win? Well, it can be anything between 5, 10, 15, 20%. But then what are those percentages? If you look at those differences, what are those margins? Well, it's a degree of how you adjust the seat for the team, the tire pressure, right?
Yep.
A different posture of the cyclist, which each add 0.x to 1, 2, 3, 5%, which very quickly can add up to that amazing when if someone wins by 20% in the Tour de France. And he's a cyclist, and that's what really made it click for him, right? Yeah. And now they're actually tearing into it, and there are a lot of changes that they are driving. And I'm sure we'll talk about this with him, also kind of transmitting it to the larger community, because we already spoke about it. But this resonates with me. It sounds like that you guys approached the craft of building a world-class analytics function. And again, I really appreciate that you say that, of course, there's a lot to get done. I've seen it all. Everyone has a lot to get done, right? Yeah. Who says they don't? Well, I've seen it. I've seen it. Okay, so this is not one of those platforms, but this is awesome. So with you joining there, how were you guys on strategy, data strategy? Was that something that was in place? Was that something like maybe a good conversation, and then we can kind of see the nuts and bolts of it? Of did you guys have a data strategy? If you had one, how was it created? Maybe that would be an interesting opening.
Yeah, I will say we had a data strategy for our corporate data, right? So but for our analytical data, we did not. And that was really, so when I started, my role was kind of everything outside of the P&L. So that operational data to drive the store business. And that's where we didn't. And that was part of that strategy that we had to lay out, was what are, each step of the way, what are the different data sets we want to go after? And like I said, I've been there 9 years. It's only the last probably 4 or 5 years that we've really started to make those improvements. And where we're at today is a very different place, but we had to lay out what that strategy was, and quite frankly had to bring some people on board that were architects and could architect it the right way. And then I talked about, we POC'd a lot of different tools, and so there's the data strategy itself. What do you need? When do you need it? How do you need it? But then there's also the tools that you need to bring on to make that happen. And you need people that can do both of those things, is help you identify what you need, and then people that can execute and deliver on it. And so that was, you think of, talked about building that business case early on. It was a lot of that was, what is the strategy we need to implement? And then, that's probably, like I said, five years ago, we felt like we knew what we needed, and then it's been building since that time. And like a lot of people in the BI space, is justifying what you need and when you need it. I think most BI teams that I've seen, they start small, and you have to prove that value. And it's very rare where you're at an organization where they're going to say, "Oh, here's 15 headcount to go figure out how to do BI." Right? That's not how it works. And so it's defining the strategy, and then continuing to build your business case every step of the way. Of what are the people, what are the tools, what are the expenses you're going to have, and then what's that ultimately the return you're going to get from that investment.
Absolutely. And in the conversation that I just had with Dayon from FanDuel, one of our other board of advisors members, so we talked because he came to Austin last year. He had a great session, and now we're going to dive deeper into that, which is, well, look, first of all, do you have a data strategy? Do you not have a data strategy? And if you do have a data strategy, are you delivering on that strategy? And if you're not delivering on that strategy, where are the gaps? What is not getting delivered? If you don't have a strategy, well, there's a way that you can build it. Again, there's no established gospel on this, but there are industry best practices of the successful ones that actually gain traction, not just look good, not just sounded good, but actually well fit in the organizations, and they drove performance in those key areas. So one of the things that he laid out is that data infrastructure is like one of those first pieces, of which architecture is a part of, and then governance is another part of it, and then also these use cases and the access to truth and data. So what were the components of your data strategy? You said that you actually, in the context of almost a decade, you ticked most of those boxes. What were those boxes that you guys ticked, and we can also zoom in on that journey and see.
So the first thing for us was identifying what are the key use cases. What are some use cases that we can really dive into and prove value around BI, and then the data structure supporting that is, what data do we need and how are we going to get it. And that was early on what we identified and where we could drive value. And it was in that operational data, going deeper into sales, and then how do we display it and share that information out. So knowing that's, for me, as I've done different BI projects in my career, it's getting those use cases that you can deliver on to build champions, and that fuels that continued growth and that evolution. And so that's where we started. And then, so knew that was where, but then that was needed to bring on a data architect and needed to bring on some data engineers that could actually bring it to life. And I touched on it. We had analysts that could do analysis, but we didn't have any of those hardcore data people. And bringing on the architect and engineers, they really had this vision. And I've said it to you plenty of times. I have a great team, a really talented team that now has skill sets far above and beyond where I'm at. But they have a vision and they can execute on it. And so that was a really key turning point, is starting to get those true data people, because what that unlocks is they then can work with our analysts and our reporting teams to understand, how do you need the data model, and what's the best way to make your analysis as efficient as possible. And we're still building that. I don't think, you said it before, the journey of data never ends. There's always something new that you have to do, but it's each step, it makes it easier. And then I will say, once we deliver on a couple of them, it's what are those next business cases, and how can we continue to provide value for the organization? And I feel good that that's what we've done. The team has grown because the organization has seen the benefits and then seen the need that's coming in the future to continue to be more data literate and be more data driven. Being data driven, I think everybody says that, and we do too, but there's a lot of habits that you have to change to go with that. And when you've been a brand that's around 85 years, that has been successful during that time, that makes the evolution, I think it's easier if you're in complete crisis mode to make some pretty dramatic changes. But you still have to make those changes. It's just a little bit harder to get people to trust data and use data.
Absolutely. And I love the conversation of being data driven because it's being so, I think, overused. Often people don't, it's just this mythical, ephemeral concept of being data driven. I love demystifying things. So that's also actually what we're doing even this year with the board of advisors and these podcasts and everything that we're pushing out, is to demystify that. But what is data drivenness, if there's such a phrase, right? And what are the key components of it? And again, I see all these same patterns emerging. So before we get into, because I would love to understand also like how your use cases evolved and based on what did you choose the new ones. Before we do that, when you brought on the hardcore data people, how easy was their integration into the existing structures, and what were the key bottlenecks maybe in collaboration and communication and integration?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that with that. One is being comfortable, and this isn't really a bottleneck, but more of a reality of doing it. Be comfortable with feedback of you maybe haven't done things the right way. And we had, and I think that was, being really open to, they're going to want to change the things that you've done. I think the biggest bottleneck is, and everybody experiences it, people want things done immediately. And it takes time, right? If you're going to build a new data pipeline, it takes time, and you have to figure out how you're going to get it, where you're going to land it, how you're going to structure it. Then you have to test it, and you have to make sure that those pipelines work consistently. And then when you build your models, do they work in the ways that you think they're going to? And then ultimately you had your requirements, but now when analysts or developers are seeing the end product, do those requirements really match what they needed? And you try to do checks and balances throughout the process, but it's never that easy. And I'll be honest, I wish things move faster. I think everybody in the data space and analytical space wishes you could move faster than you really can. And that's why it's important to also take the time to look back. It's kind of fun to look back where you're at 9 years ago, because getting stuck in the moment means you're forgetting about all the things you've accomplished along the way. So I think, that is the biggest bottleneck that it was one, there was a lot that had to be rebuilt for all the right reasons. And then two, because you're spending time rebuilding, you're not spending time on working on those future things, and getting people comfortable with, I'm always a build the structure and the timeline, but be really flexible, because those are going to change and they're going to evolve, and the needs of the business are going to evolve. So you may have a good 1, 3, 5 year plan, but by the time you get 8 months in, that could look very different depending on what's happening within the business.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so when we look at the use cases that you guys had used. So you mentioned that you built up a lot of success, and then as you expanded, I had to evaluate things differently. So how did that change go down within the team? And then also, I correct me if I'm wrong, but the size of your team probably was growing as well in the
Yeah.
organization. What were the challenges with that scaling?
Yeah, I will say the biggest use cases weren't advanced analytics by any means. It was simplifying reporting. So, how do you get automated reporting where people can check their inbox every, once a week or once a month, and the reports are there? It was also for us delivering self service, and I know self service means a lot of different things depending on where you're at. But for us, it's how do you enable our business partners across the organization to get at the data they need to do their jobs, um, and really transforming our analytics team to be focused on more higher end analysis, right? If someone wants to know how many blizzards we sold last Tuesday, that we can do via self service. But now, if they want to go, where did you sell it? Who did you sell it to? How do we make those customers come back for this other product? That's where an analytics team can spend their time. But it was building those tools for different areas of the organization, and then a lot of training and getting people comfortable with how to use those tools. So I will say our early use cases were much more on the reporting side. You think of all the different graphics you see about building an analytics competency. Ours was really around that descriptive is what are the tools that can tell people what happened so we can start figuring out the why, and how we make certain things happen.
So it's funny because one of the key pain points of many of the members of the data storytellers community, and of course everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses. As you engage with the community, you understand actually where you are compared to others. But being stuck in the report vending machine box is a common
Yeah.
issue, right? And you just
Yep.
feel like a boxer in the corner taking punches, and people just expect they press a button, the report comes out, and just keep doing it, and it can really put a strain on the teams, right? So we're just
Yep.
working with a few of the members too who have this exact same problem. They just can't really keep up with the reporting. The structures underneath are not ideal, and they're looking for how can we automate this? How can we move to self service? So again, I love the conversations around demystifying. What do you think self service is should be, and how should teams approach achieving self-service from your perspective? And again, there are many different levels of this, many different articulations and expressions of self-service, but I would be
Yeah.
interested in your journey specifically and your 2 cents.
Yeah. So my perspective, what I've always thought about with self-service is how do we make the easy or the everyday questions easy? I don't expect our partners in operations or in marketing to do the advanced analytics, right? They're not going to do statistical analysis, and that's what I don't view that's what self-service should be. But if there's everyday questions that people have, or they want to see what performance was in Vancouver, how do we make it easy for them to do that? And I mentioned it before, and then that frees up our analyst teams to work on those more complicated things. I think the other thing with self service is we can talk about the tools, but there's a tremendous amount of training that has to go with it as well, because end users probably aren't going to understand the data the same way that your engineers do, or that your analysts do, or your report developers do. And what we don't want to get to is people have used the wrong filters, or people have looked at the wrong data set, and now something gets published that's not accurate. So to me, it's the how do you make the things that should be pretty easy, and how do you make sure that the end users are trained so they're getting the right information that we need? And then my team is the BI team, being the backstop to help validate and verify and answer any deeper questions that people may have.
Mm.
It's you're spot on. I think self-service does vary a lot between different organizations and the capabilities within those organizations. To me, I don't think there is a perfect right fit for self-service. It's what's the right fit for your organization and your team, and figuring out where that's at.
And that it should serve a purpose, and
Yes.
then whether you should prioritize it, and then how does good look like? What are you satisfied with, so they can move on. And with this, by the way, so there are all kinds of phrases floating around. One of them, kind of connected to self-service, at least similar pain points are involved, is a question of centralized or dispersed BI.
Yeah.
Again, big words being thrown around, but again, maybe we can talk about that a little bit. How did you guys think about that question of how centralized the data analytics whole capability should be, and how much should be embedded in the organization?
Yeah. Um, it's a great question. And, where I was at previously was much more dispersed than where we're at today. And part of it for us at Dairy Queen is just size. So obviously we're a really big brand, but we're a mid-sized organization. We have 500-ish corporate employees. And so when I think centralized versus dispersed, I think, one team supporting the organization, or do you have analysts and BI team members that reside in the different pillars of the business? For us, centralized just makes more sense given our size and our scale. So we have one centralized BI team that is managing the data intake, that data architecture and engineering. We support enterprise reporting. Now, we do have folks that reside in the business that build their own reports, but we're trying to do it on centralized data sets. And then, the advanced analytics team, we just have one team that is focused in those areas. So we're a more centralized model, but again, I think that varies depending on where you're at and where you're at from an organizational perspective and what you can support. I think there's value for both of it, right? Having analysts that are ingrained in every pyramid of the business makes their job easier in a lot of ways, because they can focus on just operations, or they can focus just on marketing. But again, for our size, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating to me because Dairy Queen, huge brand, in general, like a lot of people working at Dairy Queen, but the corporate office though is smaller, right? And you're serving
Yeah.
many of the franchisees who then serve many customers every day. I mean, I don't know, how many customers do you guys serve every day?
Oh,
And
geez.
that must be no. It's like a left field inquiry.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have access to the data, but yeah, even the magnitude we're talking about, like
Yeah.
tens of millions of transactions every day.
Yeah, it is such a massive, like I said before, we're in over 20 countries and different size in all of those countries, but yeah, hundreds of thousands, millions and millions per year that we're serving, which is what makes the data so fun, is because you have that. But and I think for us, and maybe part of this is my philosophy is. When it comes to centralized, decentralized, and I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, is I want to start lean and prove value before I try to really grow a team. I think the worst thing you can do is add a lot of headcount and not be delivering. And if you deliver and you continue to show use cases and the benefit, it creates those discussions down the line become a lot easier if you do it that way.
And if you reflect on those 9 years, and now we're kind of moving into deeper into that evolutionary journey, what was the biggest challenge for you? Do you remember what was the biggest professional challenge during that time? Especially because, I mean, you guys were in a changing landscape very intensely, both in data analytics, both in business, both in the world. Like, just imagine how many things happened in the past 10 years. Just in the past 3 years and the past year, and it keeps accelerating. So yeah, what did you find to be the most challenging?
There's a couple things that have been really I think about the biggest data set that we use around our point of sale data. We had never done it in house. And so building all of that from scratch was was hard. I'll be fully transparent. I'm a bit, you want to be ambitious, but also realistic. And it was a big lift to get to where we're at today. I think and this is a little bit more my personal journey, I guess, is getting comfortable with no longer being the expert, and getting comfortable with having a team that can do things that I can't do anymore. It is, as you go and manage bigger teams and manage different skill sets, that I think is part of that growth as well. Uh, and trusting that there's areas you may not know, but other people do, and that's why you've brought them on. Is you bring in smart people to tell you what to do, not tell them what to do. So I think those are the biggest things. I think the other piece is, for us, it's there's two parts. It's how do you tell stories internally to our corporate team, but then ultimately the tools that you're building and the analytics you're building, you also need to tell that story to our franchisee base, right? And we have a lot of franchisees in many different countries, and so how do you tailor that message every time you're telling the story for the audience that you're speaking to? And you can't underestimate how hard that is. You might have your message, but you need to tell that message in 20 different ways, depending on who the audience is. And that's a piece that it's fun because you have 20 different audiences who ultimately care about something different. And that's a fun part of the job, is how do you change that message? But there's growing pains with that as well.
Absolutely. And it resonates because just yesterday we had another round two podcast with Pete Scherf, who is the VP of Enterprise Research and Analytics. I think now VP of Analytics and AI, actually, at Swire Coca-Cola. And he's a great guy. Attended one of our masterclasses before we did the podcast, which is one of our most popular ones. And we did a round two. And one of the parts of his 3x3, his playbook, was storytelling, and we kind of hashed out some storytelling best practices. So what's the right way to look at storytelling as a data leader, right? And we're not talking about the little anecdotes or the little narrative tools. We're talking about really storytelling in general. And you're hitting on it because like the framework, which now we label SAS framework, right? It's a threefold framework. One is the storyteller. So do you have your message, right? Do you have a solid identity and position and a well conceptualized story of who you are, what you do, who you're helping, how you're helping that particular group, what is your value, what can be your value, what can you do, what can't you do, what should you do, like all these things. This is stories, conceptualizing and contextualizing yourself through storytelling. So that's the first part. So who tells the story? Because also, like, your story comes from you. Everything is filtered through you.
Yeah.
Then in every single way. So first you need to get that home front in order. So that's one. Then you have the A, which is the audience. Who are you actually talking to? The relationality. This is not a word, but you get the idea. That the relationship between the two of you. They will receive your story. You can have the best story in the world, but if it does not connect with the audience, if it does not push the right emotional levers, it does not appeal on a level of value, especially in business where the very nature of the landscape implies a scarcity of resources and time. Always. I mean, that's what the game is about. And at the end of the day, and how can you collaboratively organize yourself so that you drive as much value as possible. But in that environment, you need to make sure that your message is well angled and directed at who you're talking to. And this whole idea of empathy, again, it's being thrown around, emotional intelligence, right? But that's what that means, that you start to every single thing that you look at and say and work, always run it through the vision of your customer, your audience. Always helps you immensely. And then once you have those two things in place, Then we can talk about the story shared in between the storyteller and the audience. Now, this is when we talk about narrative arcs. And this is when we talk about what a good story is. And how do you structure it? How do you deliver it? How do you make sure that it's driving the right outcome, that it will gain traction, that will capture those hearts and minds, right? So we always like to look at it that way. And it's incredibly important. Even in Nashville, we'll kind of dive into that of, okay, in the context of your data strategy and what you need to do in your organization, where did you identify your gaps and your best opportunities, understanding where you are, where you need to go, and how do you put the story together in a compelling way that will serve as your, what we call the data story engine. It's now an asset that your team has. It's kind of can be a superpower. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah. And I would add that, like, be relentless in telling that story and sharing the value. Maybe not everybody wants to hear it, but I think you and I have talked. To me, an analytics, my role as VP of BI is advocate and remove roadblocks, right? It is, if you can do those two things and continue to advocate and sell the story and talk about the benefits that BI drives at every chance you get, that's how I think I can help my team best, is continuing to build that support. And storytelling is foundational. If you can do the greatest analysis in the world, but if you can't explain it and tell it to a wide variety of audiences, it's not going to deliver the value that you expect it's going to.
Absolutely. And not just an advocate, but I would say also an ambassador. We talked about that. And it's a very privileged position, by the way. It drives huge value. As I always say, that you guys need to excel as two different people. You need to excel as the architect, and you need to excel as the ambassador as well, to differing degrees. And I don't know if we did talk a little bit about basketball in the context of historical Minnesota NBA history, right? But I don't know if you followed the finals recently. Yeah, so Boston won, and one of the most fascinating personalities in this whole story is Joe Mazzulla, the head coach of the Boston Celtics, who's 35 years old, and he won an NBA championship. It's an exceptional achievement. And he has a very interesting approach to his craft. He's actually called the analytics guy in basketball circles. And even in the post-game interview, they asked him that, hey, you're known as the analytics guy, but how did you get your team to buy into this whole thing? So he talks about that. It's a fascinating conversation. It's an 8-minute clip if someone wants to look it up on YouTube. And he talks a lot about how what he does actually is being the advocate, making sure that the team has what they need, wherever they need to be represented. He represents the team. He's the ambassador of the team. He's the steward of the mission and the story, and he just tries to stay out of the way of the people that he trusts, because I mean, all the things that the players are doing on the field, he's not able to do. All these people are better at that. So it's a fascinating way to look at it. By the way, were you happy with the score in the finals, or Laszlo, or did you have a skin in the game?
I would have rather seen my Timberwolves in the finals, but man, Boston is really good, and they play great as a team. You think about they have some superstars, but everybody contributes, and they play a fun way, both offensively and defensively. So I'm happy with how it turned out, but would have rather had it been the Wolves.
Yeah, the Wolves. I think they had some moments. The Wolves, we talked about the last time, they had a potential shot at the championship, right? But we're waiting for the next Kevin Garnett and Sam Castle and Marbury setup. And it's interesting that I'm just realizing this connection between the Celtics and then Dairy Queen, that it's an old franchise. It's one of the old, maybe even the oldest franchise in NBA, and definitely the most history. Like the Lakers Boston rivalry is historical, and they are the two biggest franchises. And Boston is now, the team is integrating the modern ways of working, including analytics, into their organization. And it's a lot of parallels that I'm noticing, because that's what I do. I just sit here, talk with a bunch of these leaders across all kinds of industries and disciplines, and I just see the same patterns emerging. So one of the best parts of my job is kind of bringing it to life and
Yeah.
helping drive the profession forward. So, sir, this was fascinating. We are coming up against the hour here, so I knew it was going to be a lot of fun. Do you have anything else that you would like to add to this story of yours that you would like to fit in there that just plays a crucial role and needs to be covered?
Yeah, I think the last thing I would add is, and I touched on it a couple different times, is just the power, kind of what you're talking about the Celtic, but power of having a good team and letting your team do their jobs. I get to be the face of a lot of it, but honestly, it's the team that is doing all of the great work behind the scenes. And so that's kind of my last thing is never stop recognizing those who drive the work that's being done. And additionally, don't stop recognizing the partners that are coming to you and asking for help and being open to uh, data driven solutions and being open to different ideas that the data leads you to rather than what gut instincts lead you to. So that's the last plug I want to put there is, get a great team and get out of their way is I think the best path forward to success.
And I think that's why also in the community, the team performance playbooks became very popular. So people are looking for, okay, how can I serve my team better as a leader? What do I need to put in place for them to thrive and
Yep.
be able to do what you hired them for and excel in them and grow in that? So this was fascinating. Thank you very much for the insights, Lance. We're gonna continue the conversation. I mean, this year on multiple fronts, and yeah, we really appreciate you being a part of our community and the board of advisor member, and we can't wait to continue our collaboration.
Well, thank you, Laz. I appreciate you giving me the chance and appreciate the journey that we're going to continue on.